With this session update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. Tuesday morning, February 11th, the Walz administration authorized the Commerce Department to continue appealing the decision by the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission to allow a certificate of need for the Enbridge Line 3 pipeline replacement project. In a statement, Governor Walz said, "By continuing that process, our administration will raise the Department of Commerce's concerns to the court in hopes of gaining further clarity for all involved. As I often say, projects like these don't only need a building permit to go forward, they also need a social permit. Our administration has met with groups on all sides of this issue, and Minnesotans deserve clarity." Republican lawmakers gathered on the steps of the Minnesota Senate building to speak to the press about the governor's decision.
Well, good morning. As you're aware, Governor Walz decided to extend the lawsuit related to Line 3 pipeline. That's very, very frustrating. It's a step that didn't have to happen, and it only further delays a project that we think will inevitably happen. And I just wanted to read some of his statements and respond to them in his with the decision he made. "When it comes to any project that impacts our environment and our economy, we must follow the process, the law, and the science," he said. Well, frankly, we did on all of those things. We followed the law. The science is sure that this would be environmentally much safer to replace a 51-year-old pipe with a new pipe. And so on every issue there, he was wrong. The Dayton administration appeal of the PUC's decision is now a part of this process. By continuing that process, our administration will raise the Department of Commerce concern to the court in hopes of gaining further clarity for all involved. Well, lawsuits and appeals do not have to be part of the process and normally shouldn't be part of the process. And I'm convinced that no one needs further clarity about this project. He also said, as I often say, projects like these don't only need a building permit to go forward, they also need a social permit. Our administration has met with groups on all sides of this issue, and Minnesota deserves clarity. Well, Walz and Flanagan are the only ones left in the state that need clarity on this project. It has met every test. The decision to continue the Dayton administration's appeal will help ensure that Minnesota permitting process is clear, thorough, and fair, said Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. Delays are not fair to the workers that want these jobs. Delay is not fair to making sure that our environment is protected with a safer pipeline. And finally said, as this process goes forward, our administration will continue meeting with Minnesotans passionate about this issue and engaging in meaningful conversation with the affected tribes. Frankly, Governor Walz, on this issue, you're not listening. This is an issue that we've had a lot of conversation about. It needs to go forward, and there's a lot of people that are very upset that this process is continuing to delay and delay and delay. I'm always going to be looking for a win-win with the governor. This is a lose-lose. It's a lose for the environment. It's not going to be environmentally good to have an old pipeline in there when we could have had a new one. And it's a lose for our construction workers that are looking forward to these jobs. There, in fact, are more areas, but it is a lose-lose.
Well, good morning. This obviously is bad news for the state of Minnesota. And I think, moreover, this was Governor Walz's first test on what one Minnesota means. And in this example, I think very clearly Governor Walz has failed the test. This was an opportunity to side with Minnesotans, to side with jobs, to side with the science, to side with local governments who are looking forward to the property tax revenue. And Governor Walz chose to side with extreme environmentalists who last week we saw are willing to do anything to stop oil from coming out of the ground, including turning valves to turn off pipelines. And I think the fact that he's siding with such a small minority of Minnesotans instead of where most Minnesotans are, believing that this is the safest way to transport oil, that this is the best thing for our state's economy, this is the best thing for the union jobs of the folks that will build these pipelines. And it's the best thing for our Minnesota communities to get this oil off of the rails and through pipelines. And it's the best thing for our environment, which is to replace an aging pipeline, something that's 50 years old that even the Obama administration said should be replaced. And I'll remind folks that the Public Utilities Commission unanimously supported this certificate of need and supported this pipeline moving forward. So that's how extreme this position is, and it's really unfortunate that Governor Walz has chosen to side with extreme radical environmentalists and not with Minnesotans. So we're very disappointed in that. I think Representative Fabian has a couple things to say.
Thank you. You know, I don't want you to listen to me. I want you to listen to some elected officials Neil Peterson, Pennington County Commissioner, sent this message to me this morning. As a commissioner and landowner, I'm deeply disappointed in Governor Walz's decision. Local elected officials and residents along the pipeline were not given a place at the table. In Crookston at the governor's listening session, he said that in Minnesota, we have a process, and once that process is completed, we need to get out of the way and let the projects be completed. This is a very sad day for Minnesota that Governor Walz is not listening to all stakeholders. Just so happens I was exchanging emails yesterday with the superintendent of schools in my district. Also, he says, thank you for your continued push to keep Line 3 moving. Our area needs the pipeline improvements. It's been good for local public and private economies and is the safest option for transport of these fuels. With a north-south rail corridor less than 1 mile from the school, I do not like seeing so many fuel cars travel by. I got this message from the mayor of Thief River Falls this morning, Brian Homer. It's disappointing to hear Governor Walz's decision move forward with the appeal. The pipeline will provide a safe and secure way to transport oil versus the increased railroad traffic that travels directly through my community. Line 3 is a big part of the economy, providing jobs, buying goods, services, and paying taxes. And quite frankly, folks, those of us in rural Minnesota, we feel betrayed by this decision.
Questions?
Are you really surprised?
I am really surprised. Both Minority Leader Bach and I approached the governor about this. We felt like this was an opportunity for him just to let the process work. And so when he came back and put out this decision, it was a big surprise to us.
What comes next? What will you do?
Well, now we have to, the process is delayed. That's the problem. As you look at all the different projects that we do in Minnesota, whether it's polymet mining and 15 years of permitting, here's another example of delay that we don't have to have. That's the point, is we don't have to do this. When the project meets all the expectations, goes through all of the process, let's make it move. There's a lot of jobs that are waiting for this project to move forward. And you heard from our government officials up in northern Minnesota also very frustrated, and it's bipartisan frustrated. I mentioned that Senator Bach and myself both think that this was a big mistake.
Do you think this is a one-off, or do you think this sets the governor on a bad footing with the business community?
My hope is that this is a learning lesson for the governor. This is a big mistake. I hope that he gets a lot of feedback from a lot of people about this misstep. So that we can try to have better steps going forward. But and I left a message with him last night saying that we were going to do this press conference, that this was the wrong step. It's like a missed free throw or a missed extra point. It was something he could have done, should have done, but didn't get done.
What's your message to the folks in the impacted areas that we're counting on this now that it's going to be delayed even further?
We have no excuses for them. It's a big disappointment. I don't. It's frustrating because I want to put all the blame on the governor. I think that's where it should rest, but in the end, it's up to all of us in government to get it done.
Were you informed last night of the decision?
I was informed yesterday, yes. The governor.
Himself. Did
Yep.
you speak with him directly about your disappointment?
No, it came from somebody in his leadership to our leadership.
You've not had a chance to talk to him?
Correct.
Okay.
Do you agree with the minority leader's assessment that this was the governor's first test of one Minnesota and it's a test he failed?
Well, we were going to talk about this isn't one Minnesota, so I was going to call you the speaker again, buddy. But certainly the minority leader and myself are in total agreement here. It was extreme environmentalism that won out. Not environmentalism, but extreme environmentalism that stops a lot of the business that needs to go forward in Minnesota.
Do you stand by that? Those are fighting words to say this was failed one Minnesota. That was his mantra that he won on.
I think the governor had an opportunity here to, and I think the governor made some promises to the unions that care about these jobs. And I think you'll probably hear from those leaders in the unions that they feel like promises were broken. And I would ask those questions of those folks. I think Governor Walz, and you know what, I have been very vocal in the past about Governor Dayton kind of saying one thing and doing another. I think as I have traveled around the state in recent months, folks have been very optimistic about Governor Walz, that he would be kind of a consensus builder and somewhat of a moderate. And I think he failed that test on this issue. I think this was, as the leader said, a layup, and I think he missed it. I think he had an opportunity to side with Minnesotans, and he didn't. He's siding with extreme environmentalists The real environmental position on this is to build the pipeline. That's the safest thing for our environment. It's the best thing for our environment. Not building this is actually worse for the environment because oil is going to continue to travel through a 50-year-old pipeline, 60-year-old pipeline, and it's going to continue to travel on the rails through our small towns and big cities all throughout the state of Minnesota. And that's not the best thing for our environment.
So do you two think the governor's honeymoon is officially over today?
Did we say that, Mary?
Yeah, I mentioned that we're going to keep looking for win-wins, but if we're in a place where it's a step that we think is not good for Minnesota, we're going to call them out on it. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to keep working towards the things that are good for Minnesota. This was just a step that he shouldn't have taken.
Let me comment on that too. You know, I stood with the governor on the federal shutdown issue and that Minnesota needed to do what we could to mitigate that. And I said in that press conference, I will stand with the governor when I agree with him. But I'll also stand up and say, hey, I disagree with this thing that you're doing, and this is one of those cases. And I would expect him to do the same of us. It doesn't mean we can't have a good working relationship. I have a lot of respect for him, but we're going to hold him accountable just like Minnesotans will. And I think he missed the opportunity to side with Minnesotans on this issue. And it's a misstep, definitely.
What message does this send to greater Minnesota about their governor?
I wish Fabian was still here. Fabian has been somewhat critical of this governor and his commissioner picks, that his one Minnesota didn't represent greater Minnesota. That's something that we have been somewhat critical of for quite some time. I think greater Minnesota really wanted this project to happen. If you think of the investment, and this is a private investment in northern Minnesota, a $3 billion private investment. That's like building 3 Viking stadiums in northern Minnesota. And we know what a investment the Viking stadium was here. In fact, the legislature and the previous governor liked it so much that they paid for half of it. But we're talking about 3 times that investment in greater Minnesota, and a governor standing up and saying, no, I don't want this to move forward. And I think greater Minnesota should pay close attention to the fact that the governor's standing in the way of those jobs and that progress.
Can the leader from northern Minnesota comment on that too? What Dana said specifically on greater Minnesota.
I was just making sure it wasn't Fabian around here. But, yeah, obviously this was a big setback for what we're trying to do in outstate Minnesota. We're looking to create jobs everywhere. Pipelines were a big area that we could create a lot of jobs. So is mining. That's another area that's been delayed. And so you see that I've trying to build bridges with Senator Bach as well, another rural legislator on the other side of the aisle, and you saw that on many of these issues we're talking together affecting rural Minnesota. And so when Governor Walz goes the opposite direction on this, it should be a sign that he's not paying attention to what's happening out in rural Minnesota.
Apart from what message this sends, is this delay going to cost taxpayers anything?
Any delay is going to cost taxpayers eventually, whether it's the extra permitting that they have to do, the extra court cases that they have to go through. It doesn't matter whether it's this project or mining or any other manufacturing or any kind of job that takes permitting. The longer the process takes, the more expenses pass down to the consumer. And so, again, they went through all of the process and then suddenly they get another hurdle that they have to go over, and that's frustrating. It's also frustrating when other businesses look into what's happening in Minnesota and they say, is this where we want to come? Is that what we want to go through? And so we're trying to create an atmosphere where people say this is a business-friendly state, this is a state where people want to come and grow jobs for Minnesotans. This is the opposite of that.
Politically, does it help your party or your caucus?
I'm not, on this particular issue, the political ramifications I think are bad for Governor Walz, but that's not the reason that we're trying to focus on this. In the end, it's what's best for Minnesota and what's best for rural Minnesota, and clearly on every level this was best for Minnesota. So, that's going to be our focus always. First, what's best for Minnesota. Politics are going to always be out there. We suffer the consequences of the actions we make. The Governor Walz will suffer consequences with a bunch of people that trusted him on this issue, and he didn't follow through. So, thank you.